In front of that little roadside grocery, Jack Mercer, a soldier who'd been gone for years, just froze when he spotted a kid curled up under a thin blanket, clutching a bag of food someone had just tried to snatch away. But it wasn't the dirt on the boy's shirt that stopped Jack cold. It was the silver chain hanging around his neck, the very same one Jack had given his son, Benny, on his 3rd birthday, right before the family came apart. The boy looked up for a moment, and Jack caught sight of a birthmark shaped like a star behind his left ear, a detail only blood would carry. If that really was Benny, why was he out here alone, drifting through a cold afternoon market? Who had brought him to this place? And that black car across the street with its lights shut off, what was it waiting for? The train station was empty. The sliding door of the car opened with a hiss, letting out a draft of cold air mixed with the smell of old grease. Jack Hensley stepped down slowly, a faded army pack hanging loose on his left shoulder, his boots landing hard on the rough cement. He stopped there, eyes scanning a town he once knew now, covered with a thin grey dust of time. Everything was quiet, quiet enough that he could hear the rusty bolts on the old sign rattling in the wind. He hadn't expected anyone to be waiting. Nobody knew, and truth be told, nobody cared. His contract was over, so he got off at the nearest stop. No phone call, no notice. 12 years in uniform, 6 deployments, 3 different units. Now, there was no place left to call home. The wedding ring was gone from his finger, and his ex-wife's voice was nothing more than a faint echo tucked away in his memory. At the far end of the platform, the old woman at the ticket booth looked up when she heard his steps dragging across the floor. She gave him a small nod, her eyes distant, before dropping them back to her paperwork. Nobody recognized him. Nobody knew he had been a soldier. Nobody asked. Jack shoved his hands into his pockets and walked out of the station, crossing the dusty parking lot. By the road, the town's sign leaned crooked, half broken. Welcome to Fairhill, a town with roots. Only now someone had sprayed black paint over the word roots, turning it into ruins. Jack stopped at a small intersection. The walk light kept blinking red, stuck like the wiring was shot. He didn't have anywhere in mind to go, just stood there, wind cutting through his collar, cold settling into his skin. He was dragging on half a cigarette when he noticed a figure hunched across the street. An old woman, long white hair hanging loose, back bent, one shaky hand clutching a worn paper sack. Her eyes flicked toward him, not clear if she was asking for help or just bracing herself. A black SUV roared past, horn blasting. She jumped, nearly slipping off the curb. Jack flicked his smoke away and moved quick. He raised his arm like he could hold back traffic. Nobody stopped. Not until he leaned down, took her by the elbow, and walked her across one slow step at a time. Her shoes were old, soles scraping. Her hand was ice cold, stiff like wood. Easy now, I'll get you through, Jack said, voice rough from the long train ride. She gave a small nod, never looking him in the eye. On the other side, he was ready to let go, give a nod, and keep moving. But she stayed put, her hand still holding onto his coat. Light, but steady. Do you know anywhere? Still open. Jack glanced around. Every storefront was dark. A gas station far off still had its lights, but here there was nothing, just a flickering street lamp and a rusted park bench. Open what? He asked. Somewhere to stay, out of the wind. Just one night. She pressed her lips together. I don't have a place. Jack didn't answer right away. The wind kicked up, blew strands of her hair across his face. The crinkle of that paper sack in her hand made him think of another time kids in Afghanistan standing frozen between 2 lines of fire. That same sharp pull in the chest. The instinct to step in, mixed with the fear that once you start, you might not know where it ends. What's your name? Jack asked. She looked at him for the first time. Her eyes were cloudy, rimmed in red, like it had been years since anyone had cared enough to ask. Mabel, she said, her voice barely holding. Mabel Kane. Jack gave a short nod. I'm Jack. He looked back at the now empty intersection, then at her again. Come on, walk with me. We'll find something. He wasn't sure there was anything open, no plan, no map, but he couldn't leave her standing there in the cold, in a town that barely seemed to remember itself. They moved along the sidewalk, past blacked-out windows, a bakery shut tight, the library boarded up. She told pieces of her story, broken sentences, house taken last year, papers all gone, daughter somewhere out of state, but she don't answer anymore. Jack didn't press her, he just slowed his stride, close enough to block some of the wind. At the next intersection, Mabel stopped, clutching his hand tighter. Wait, I'm dizzy. Her knees buckled, color drained from her face. Then she crumpled to the pavement, her head striking the curb. Jack caught her as best he could, but his hands came away damp with something cold. He couldn't tell if it was water or blood. He looked around. No one. Not a single soul. No phone in his pocket. No siren wailing down the street. Just an old soldier, a trembling woman, and a town that didn't hear a cry for help anymore. Jack slipped under the old awning of a bakery that had been shut down for years, still holding Mabel as she struggled to catch her breath. The rain had started, not heavy, but that steady kind that felt like the town had forgotten how to quit. Mabel leaned against the stained brick wall, hands shaking, her face pale but awake. Jack pulled off his outer jacket and draped it gently over her shoulders. "You need a hospital," he said. "No insurance," Mabel answered, her voice soft as leaves brushing the ground. "I didn't pass out from sickness. Just worn out." Jack sat down beside her, his back against a cracked pillar. They stayed quiet for a while, listening to the rain tap the tin roof, smelling the damp iron that rose from the street. A night bus rumbled past without stopping. "I used to have a home," Mabel said, eyes fixed not on him but on the blur between two buildings across the street. "A little blue house. My husband painted it himself, board by board. He's been gone almost 10 years now." Jack nodded, keeping silent. "My daughter, her name's Ellie. When she was little, she used to sneak outside in the rain. She'd tell me, 'Mama, the rain doesn't bite.' She got married, moved away. I don't blame her. But," she swallowed, "when the bank sent the notice, I called her. No answer. Then the line went dead for good. Mabel, the bank said I owed taxes. I never owed anyone a dime. But the bills just kept climbing. They padlocked the house, took the nameplate off the porch. I begged to keep my wedding photo. They wouldn't let me." Jack turned his face away, jaw tight. There was something familiar in her voice, not the words, but the silence that came after each one. The same silence he'd heard in field hospitals, where people stopped crying because they knew tears didn't change a thing. "You try asking for help anywhere?" he asked. "Church. Some women's groups. Too many people. One place only took folks under 65. Another said I didn't have the right papers to prove income." She gave a small laugh. "Having nothing was its own crime." Jack nodded, quiet. He pulled a water bottle from his pack and handed it to her. "Let's rest a bit. I'll figure something out." Mabel took it, her grip unsteady. Water spilled onto the ground, mixing with the steady drip of the rain. "You're military, aren't you?" she asked suddenly. Jack turned his head. "You figured that out?" "No guessing," she said. "I was once married to one. Soldiers don't just look around. They look through, like you're doing now." After a moment, she rubbed her eyes and turned away. "Sorry if I'm a burden. You don't need to drag me along. People got hurt enough already." "You're not dragging me," Jack said, slow but certain. "I'm choosing this walk." So they sat there, under the rain, like two souls the world had left sitting on the curb. And then, from down the street, headlights flared. A truck, parked there God knows how long. But now its beams cut straight into them. No blink, no courtesy, just holding steady, like it was counting down the seconds left before their quiet was gone. The rain eased off, but the wind still cut sharp through the cracks in the pavement. Jack helped Mabel to her feet, and the two of them walked slow along Main Street. The town looked like it had locked itself away behind dusty glass and tired, closed signs. It was close to 10 at night, and Jack's stomach was empty. He figured the old woman hadn't eaten all day. At the end of the block, a faint glow showed from a diner with red brick walls and a low tin roof. The wooden sign read, "Miller's Grill, since 194, with the last number missing." Jack remembered the place. Back when he was a kid, he sat inside with his father, eating cold-cut sandwiches and drinking a glass of milk so big it nearly tipped out of his hands. He pushed the door open, the bell giving a weak ring. The smell of burned coffee and old fryer oil hung heavy in the air. A few older customers sat scattered at tables, their eyes fixed on a TV replaying some football game. "Sorry, still serving?" Jack asked. A grey-haired man in a worn apron turned from wiping a table. "Yeah, if you eat quick." Jack guided Mabel to a seat by the window. She was breathing hard but managed a small smile when he pulled out her chair. He sat across from her and called out, "Chicken soup and toast for me. Something light for the lady." The man looked closer, squinting. He walked over, rubbing his hands on the apron. "You military?" Jack nodded. "Just got out." "And her?" Jack glanced at Mabel. "She's with me. Just needs a hot meal." "And?" The man let out a breath and shook his head. "I don't serve drifters." The room went quiet. Mabel lowered her gaze. Jack leaned back in his chair, eyes locked on the owner. "Come again?" "Her. She's clearly off the street. Folks like that make my customers uneasy." She hasn't asked anybody for a thing. I'm paying. This is my place. My right to refuse. You and your friend should move along." At the next table, a couple looked up. A boy froze with his spoon halfway to his mouth. Mabel whispered, "Let's just go, Jack." Jack didn't move. He kept his eyes on the man. "I carried my brothers out of the mud so places like this could keep the lights on at night. And you can't serve an old woman a bowl of soup because you're worried about comfort?" Nobody answered. The only sound was the TV calling out, "Touchdown," from another world. Mabel touched Jack's hand. "It's all right," she said softly. "Just hunger, nothing more." "Siko." Jack nodded, stood, pulled out his wallet, and laid down 3 tens on the table. "At least let me use the restroom." The man said nothing. Jack guided Mabel outside. The wind had turned sharper, like the whole town was in the silence of people used to turning away. They ended up back under the same awning. Mabel sat down, arms around her stomach. Jack stood there, hand working the old car keys in his pocket, eyes fixed on the miller's sign flickering like it was laughing at them. And then, across the street, came the heavy sound of boots. A broad-shouldered man in a black leather jacket, cap pulled low, walked toward them, step by step, not rushing, but deliberate. The rain came hard, sudden, like the sky had been holding back too long and finally let go without mercy. Jack hunched his shoulders, pulling his coat around Mabel as she sat pressed under the awning. "We need real cover," he told her. But before he could help her up, her head dropped against his chest. "Mabel?" "Nothing." "Mabel." Jack dropped to his knees, arms wrapping around her. Her body felt weightless, like a bundle of dry sticks. Her knees had no strength, her breath was shallow, broken. Rain soaked her white hair, ran cold down the back of his shirt. Without thinking further, Jack lifted her, one hand bracing the back of her head to keep it steady, and ran. He couldn't remember how many turns Fairhill had anymore. He just followed the fading road signs, eyes searching for that red cross symbol. After 3 blocks, a squat building showed itself under a pale yellow light. Sliding gate, blurred sign, Fairhill Community Medical Unit. Jack shoved the door open, his hands stiff from the cold, his vision blurred by rain and heavy breath. A reception desk, white lights, a nurse tapping at a keyboard. "She passed out," Jack said, voice ragged. "I need help." The nurse looked up. A woman about 40, brown hair tied back, eyes narrowed behind white frames. "Do you have insurance?" Jack frowned. "Not me, her. She needs to be checked." "Does she have ID?" "Not on her." "But we can't admit anyone without verified identity unless an emergency is confirmed by the attending doctor." Jack's grip tightened on his pack strap, his voice grinding. "She collapsed in the street, shaking. Hasn't eaten all day." "That doesn't count as an emergency?" The nurse glanced at the old woman lying limp in his arms. "She's not bleeding, not seizing, not unconscious for long. We're not an ER. If necessary, you can call 911. Jack stepped up to the counter, setting Mabel gently on a bench nearby, his coat still draped over her. He braced his hands on the desk, eyes sharp as steel. "You're looking at someone on the edge. If this was your mother, would you ask for insurance first?" The air thickened. A shuffle of papers from the back, a radio in the corner droning sports news. The nurse stood, sighed. "All right. I'll ask the doctor on duty if he can do a quick exam." She slipped into the back, leaving Jack standing there, chest heaving, his hand resting over Mabel's heart, like he was afraid it might stop at any moment. A side door opened. A doctor in a white coat stepped out, gave Jack a once-over, then crouched to check Mabel's pulse. "She's cold, pulse weak." "Fine. Bring her into the holding room." Jack nodded, lifting her again. But just then, the front door slammed open. A man in a thick coat, soaked through, strode in. His eyes swept the room and locked on Jack holding Mabel. From his pocket he pulled a worn leather wallet, flipped out a badge, and held it in front of Jack's face. "Name's Jack Hensley, right? You're coming with me, now." Jack didn't answer right away. His eyes stayed locked on Mabel's face, pale under the waiting room light. Her hand lay in his, cold and weightless, like wet paper. The man in front of him still held the badge out, his voice sharper this time. "I asked you, are you Jack Hensley? What's this about?" Jack said, not lifting his hand from Mabel's shoulder. "We got a report of disorderly conduct at a business half a block from here. You need to come with me and clear it up. She needs a doctor first. And you need to respect the law first." The man shot back, each word pressed hard. Jack clenched his jaw. He didn't know how far the stink from that diner stretched, but it was clear the owner or somebody in there wasn't letting things slide. And now they'd sent some rent-a-cop type at the perfect moment. The young doctor, a man around 30 with Dr. L. Monroe on his badge, had stepped out just in time to catch the exchange. His brow furrowed. She needs fluids. Her blood sugar's low. Her body temp's under normal. If she doesn't get care, this could turn dangerous. Anne? The man in the coat gave a dry laugh. Doctor, I respect your work, but if this guy caused trouble, I'm bound to. The problem's with her, not me. Jack cut in. I served 3 tours, hauled my brother's bodies 10 clicks through sand and blood. I didn't leave them then, and I'm not leaving her now. The room went still. No drama, no shouting. Just the voice of a man worn down by years, letting slip a vow he'd been carrying like a stone in his chest. Doctor. Monroe looked at Jack, then at Mabel. He gave a short nod and motioned toward the back. Bring her in. Jack nodded back, lifting Mabel once more, his grip firmer this time. The nurse stepped aside without a word. The man in the black coat stayed frozen there, like someone had just cracked his plan in half. I'll be back, Jack told him, his stare steady. Hope you do, the man muttered, turning for the door. The exam room was small but clean. The doctor laid Mabel on the bed, hung an IV bag, checked her vitals. She's exhausted, plain and simple. I'll keep her overnight, but this isn't a shelter. Come morning, I can't hold her here. I get it. Thank you. What's your name, really? Jack. Jack? Hensley? Jack nodded. The doctor paused a beat. I had a cousin in Fallujah. Same name. Jack said nothing. Too many had stayed behind in Fallujah. Mabel's breathing started to settle. Her fingers twitched faintly. Jack sank into a chair in the corner, dropping hard like the last few hours had drained him to the bone. He didn't sleep, but his eyes drifted half shut. About an hour later, the clinic's bell rang. A young woman in a pressed shirt stood at the glass door, knocking lightly, holding a piece of paper. Her eyes flicked toward the doctor's nameplate as she waited, and across the top edge of that paper, in bold italics, 3 words stood out: temporary denial of stay. Dawn hadn't fully broken, but Jack was already up. The treatment room glowed dim with yellow light, the faint smell of antiseptic drifting off the walls. Mabel still slept, her hands thin but no longer trembling. Jack stood quietly, scribbled a note: I'll be back before noon. Try to rest. Jack and slipped it on the table before stepping out into the hallway. By 7:30, he was at the town library. The doors weren't open yet, but a young clerk was rolling a cart of books into the lobby. Jack asked to get in early. The kid gave him a look drenched, worn down but nodded. Jack sat at a computer and typed Mabel Kane into the public search system. Nothing. He tried again with the address she'd mentioned, 1463 Maple Lane. This time, a property record came up. It showed the house had been foreclosed 8 months earlier for failure to pay property taxes. The debt? Less than $1,800. Jack blinked. He'd seen men die from IEDs just because they couldn't afford $3 for gloves. And now, over less than the price of a hunting rifle, an old woman lost her home. At the bottom, in small print, property transferred to Harlan Group Development Incorporated for $9,700. Jack narrowed his eyes and clicked the company name. No real website, just a few scattered mentions in real estate reports. Then a news piece popped up from 3 months back, a profile of the company's president, Victor Harlan, investor, businessman, and lover of Fairhill. Jack let out a laugh, the kind only someone who's had blood on his hands could manage. Harlan, the name rang all over town. Storefronts still carried it. Harlan Insurance, Harlan Storage, Victor's Cafe. He printed the property record, slid it into his pack, and walked to the Fairhill County Records office. A middle-aged woman at the reception desk looked at him with measured eyes. I need to see the foreclosure file for 1463 Maple Lane. Are you family? No. But I'm the one who watched her pass out from hunger last night. She froze, then spoke softly. I'm sorry. That file's sealed at the request of the buyer. Jack laid the library printout gently on the counter. I don't need the full file. I need to know how a house can be taken for that little. And how the new owner has the right to hide its history. She didn't answer, just dropped her gaze, avoiding his eyes. When Jack stepped back onto the street, the morning rain had started, fine and steady. He pulled out his phone, thumb hovering over the one number he'd saved for emergencies. Daniel Cross, an old friend, now working somewhere in the federal system, the guy who once told him, if you ever need it, call. But before he could press, a shadow blocked the hood of his car. A man in a black suit stood there, holding a thick envelope. He raised it slightly, lips curled in a half smile. Mr. Harlan wants a word with you. this afternoon. Victor Harlan's building stood at the end of North Elm, 3 stories tall, glass catching the afternoon sun like it was mocking the sagging porches scattered across town. A guard led Jack through a marble-floored hallway lined with polished leather chairs, the air thick with cologne mixed with new upholstery. The office door opened, and Harlan was there, back turned, pouring a glass of whiskey. He turned when he heard footsteps, smiling like a man used to playing lead in the local theater of power. "Jack Hensley," Harlan said, rolling the name like he was reading from a file. "Marine, 6 tours, 2 medals, 1 scar on the back of your neck you still haven't bothered to fix." Jack stood still, eyes never leaving him. "I don't need to hear why you're here," Harlan went on. "I already know. It's about the old woman Mabel. That's the name, right? She was thrown out of the house she lived in her whole life, over a debt smaller than the tab at one of your dinners." Harlan chuckled, poured more whiskey, didn't offer a drop. "Not my fault people don't understand how the system works. You know what keeps a town alive, Hensley? Not charity, money, management, men like me." Jack's fists tightened. "You picked that house up for $9,700. That's theft." "End of chupa." "Theft?" Harlan arched a brow. "I won a legal auction. Anyone could have bid. She just wasn't there. She wasn't there because nobody told her. The notice went to the wrong address. She was sick, alone." "So what?" Harlan stepped closer, his voice dropping. "People who can't hold on to a house shouldn't own one. The system doesn't run on feelings. We clear out the excess." Jack stared. He'd heard that before, half a world away from men who used bombs to purge populations. "Oliver, you're saying being poor means you deserve the street." "No, I'm saying being useless means you don't deserve ground to stand on." The air in the room froze. Jack took 1 step forward, then stopped. He hadn't come here to swing fists. Not yet. "I'll find a way to bring her home. By law, by whatever road it takes." Harlan smiled, nodding like he just heard a kid announce he was headed for the moon. "I welcome it. Use everything you've got. But remember, land in this town isn't just property, it's territory, and I'm the one holding the map." Jack turned for the door. "Oh, Jack," Harlan called after him. "Be careful about your friends. Some of them might bend easy for the right numbers on a check." Jack didn't answer. He walked straight down the hall and out of the building. His pulse was still pounding, but his head was clear. He knew Harlan's kind, talking like a lawyer, moving like a land boss. And the man had just slipped up, shown something bigger than the house. He wasn't just buying property, he was buying people. And the first one in his sights might be Mabel. Jack got back to the clinic near noon. Mabel was awake, still hooked to an IV. Her eyes dry and steady like sleep had been nothing more than a forced blackout. He sat beside her and pulled out a paper sack with bread he'd picked up along the way. She didn't ask questions, just nodded thanks. They ate in silence. When Dr. Monroe walked in, his expression had dropped. "I kept her here until noon, but the center got orders. They're cutting the bed today. I don't have the authority to keep her." "Bulk, you mean you're putting her out?" Jack asked, his voice low. Monroe nodded. "I'm sorry." Jack stood, looked at Mabel. "I'll handle it. You sit tight." He headed straight for Town Hall, into the Community Assistance Office. Behind the counter sat a woman named Linda Grover, blonde hair gone grey, glasses on a pearl chain. Jack laid Mabel's file on the desk. "I'm applying for emergency senior housing. Urgent case." Linda skimmed the papers. "This person doesn't have valid identification." She lost it when her house was sealed, but she's a long-time resident. These are the bank records. I printed them from the property office." Linda flipped through, set them down. "Not enough to legally verify identity. She needs shelter tonight. Just 1 night. You could try contacting NGOs. We don't have budget for cases like this." Jack narrowed his eyes. "What do you mean, cases like this?" Linda hesitated. "I mean cases not in the priority group. We focus on families with children, or people with certified medical status." She just walked out of the clinic. "We'd need official paperwork. Stamped." Jack pressed both hands on the counter. "I pulled people out of burning bases in Fallujah. Nobody asked for papers. And here, an old woman can't get a roof because she's missing a stamp." Linda kept the practiced calm of someone used to angry citizens. "You're insulting procedure." "No. I'm insulting the indifference you hide behind the word procedure." A man's voice carried from the back. "What's going on here?" A man in a grey suit appeared, Deputy Mayor Carlton Briggs, the one who signed off on relief budgets. Linda whispered a few words in his ear. Briggs nodded, then faced Jack. "We understand your concern, and we respect your service to this country. But the town's budget is tight. Each night of shelter costs nearly $90. If we set this precedent, we'll be swamped. Jack stood silent for a beat, then ground out. Every time you set up a festival stage, the budget is fine, but a bed for an old woman is too much. Briggs tugged at his collar. We can't operate on feelings. We manage with data, not sentiment. Jack picked up the file, staring hard at him. Maybe you don't see it, but I do. This town doesn't lack houses. It lacks a conscience. He turned for the door. But as he pushed it open, a hand landed on his shoulder from behind. A voice, low but firm, said, "I've got a place, but you'll need to play by the rules." The park in the middle of Fairhill wasn't much, just a handful of trees, a busted fountain, and a few weathered wooden benches. Jack picked the quietest corner near the man-made pond, laid his coat down so Mabel could sit. She hadn't had a real rest all morning. In her lap sat a stale loaf of bread, wrapped in yesterday's newsprint he'd bought from the old grocery down the block. The air carried a chill. Mabel hunched in, both hands wrapped around a cup of coffee, weak as dishwater but at least warm. Jack stayed on his feet, eyes sweeping the area. After his run-in with Deputy Mayor Briggs, he knew Fairhill's so-called goodwill only lived on paper. Mabel looked up, gave a tired smile. "Never thought I'd be thankful to sit in a park with nothing but warm coffee." Jack didn't smile. His jaw worked tight, eyes turning away. That's when a patrol car rolled up from across the street, lights flashing but no siren. Two cops stepped out. One was young, name tag, read T. Doyle. The other, shorter, balding, with eyes that picked at everything, Officer Murdoch. Doyle walked ahead with a notebook. "Afternoon. We got a call about folks loitering in the park." "Is one loitering?" Jack's voice was flat. "Since when does resting on a bench count as loitering?" Murdoch's eyes slid to Mabel. "How long's she been here?" "Not half an hour." "She got ID?" "She just left the clinic. Lost her papers. I'm with her." "You got a problem. You talk to me." Murdoch's frown deepened. "Public space isn't a charity ward. There's an ordinance, no overnight stays in the park since the pandemic. She's not sleeping. She's sitting." Doyle edged closer, tone softer. "We don't want trouble, but if someone files a complaint about misuse of public space..." "Somebody files a complaint because an old woman rests on a park bench," Jack cut in, staring him down. "Anyone file one on Harlan locking up 18 lots of land and leaving them empty?" Murdoch stepped forward. "Hensley, right? I remember your face from that mess at Miller's. Don't try to play hero here." Jack moved a step of his own. "And don't try to play a man by pushing an old lady off a bench." "One." Murdoch's hand went behind him, fingers closing on his cuffs. Doyle jumped between them. "Hold on. We can settle this without..." "No settling," Murdoch snapped. "We can remove anyone from this park if we suspect disorderly conduct." Jack's shoulders rose, fists tight, the muscles in his neck twitching. Mabel pushed herself up, trembling, trying to cut the tension. "I'll go. I don't want trouble." "In 3. "You've done nothing wrong," Jack told her, but she was already edging off the bench, hands shaking. Murdoch came forward, cuffs out. "You want to come too?" Jack locked eyes with him. "Yeah, I do." Doyle let out a breath, blocking again. "Murdoch, stop. There's no grounds for an arrest." Murdoch froze, glared at Jack, then dropped his hand. "Fine, this time, but next time, remember this isn't a battlefield, and you're not a soldier anymore." Jack didn't respond. But inside, the words cut across an old scar. Murdoch climbed back in the car. Doyle gave Jack a small nod before following. Jack steadied Mabel, guiding her out of the park. Across the street, behind the windshield of a black SUV, Victor Harlan sat smoking an unlit cigar, eyes fixed on them as they disappeared behind the trees. Jack brought Mabel back to the awning behind the library, the same spot they'd sat 2 nights ago. She didn't say much, just curled into the thin blanket he'd borrowed off a medic he knew. Late afternoon, light cut sideways through the trees, patchy like Jack's own mood, spots of helplessness, injustice, and anger, with nowhere to land. He sat beside her, leaning against the brick wall, eyes on the street as it emptied out. The truth didn't need explaining. The rules here were built by men with money, land, and the power to tell cops what to do. Folks like Mabel, no address, no family, no proper ID, were weeds in the road, meant to be cleared out to keep order. A pack of teenagers strolled past, laughing, one of them tossing an empty soda can that clattered against Jack's boot. Nobody stopped. Nobody said sorry. Mabel just nudged it aside with her foot, quiet as ever. "I thought I'd seen the worst of it in my life," Jack said, his voice low as cold earth. "Turns out I was wrong." "You don't have to carry more," Mabel told him. "You've already done more than anyone ever did for me." "It's not about being good," Jack muttered. "It's about not accepting that this kind of thing is normal." Mabel gave a faint laugh, brittle as an old door hinge. "Once I sent a letter to the city council, begging for help. No reply. But later I got an envelope from the bank foreclosure notice inside, but the outside read, 'Happy New Year.'" Jack turned his face away, fists tight. That kind of thing wasn't an accident. It was a system built to grind people down without anyone ever being held accountable, and he knew Fairhill wasn't the exception. It was just close enough that he couldn't pretend he didn't see. From his jacket pocket, Jack pulled the copy of the Maple Lane file. Under the buyer's name was the signature of a Harlan Group representative. At the bottom, a note. "Property reappraised under Clause 13B. Expedited transfer." He remembered that clause being argued over years back overseas legal cover to snatch property before the old owner had a chance to fight. He folded the paper, slid it into his inner pocket, then stood. "Rest here a while," he told her. "I need to take a walk." "Jack, I'm not leaving," he said, eyes steady on hers. "I just need to know one thing: who's really running the rules in this town." He turned and started down the street, each step landing heavy like a hammer on stone. But before he made it 10 yards, the phone in his pocket buzzed. He pulled it out, a text from an unknown number, 5 words only. "Don't die deeper if you're weak-hearted." Jack left the library awning and headed down the slope toward St. Jude's, the church that sat on the southern edge of town. He'd gone there in high school, following his mother on Sunday nights, back when the old priest had laid a hand on his forehead the night before he shipped out. He didn't know if the same priest was still around, but at that point he had nowhere else left to try. The slope was slick from last night's rain. The church showed itself between the tall pines, roof tiles weathered, the bell tower rusted but still upright. The wooden door stood cracked open. Jack stepped inside, the air thick with old wax and ash. A man in a white shirt with cropped salt and pepper hair was straightening chairs in the back row. Father Liam." The man turned. A flicker of confusion passed his eyes before recognition hit. "Jack Hensley. Good Lord, it's been years." "I'm not here to pray," Jack said straight. "I'm here to ask help for someone." And he laid it out quick: Mabel, the house stripped from her, nights in the rain, the cold shoulder from every office, and the way she dropped her head each time she got turned away. Father Liam didn't interrupt, just listened, hand on his chin, nodding slow. "There's a room behind the church. Old, but enough to sleep. One night, maybe 2. I won't ask questions. No ID needed? Here. You don't need a card to rest. You just need to still have a heart." Jack bowed his head. "Thank you, Father." He went back for Mabel, walked her up the slope as evening closed in. Father Liam himself brought a thin blanket and a hot cup of tea. Mabel said nothing, just squeezed Jack's hand when he stepped back out. "At least tonight you're not out in the rain," he told her. "And tomorrow?" Jack had no answer. He stood on the church steps, looking out at the town flickering to life below. He knew this was only a pause. No law would shield them. No program would open its doors. And men like Harlan, they didn't quit just because the poor found a roof for a night. His phone buzzed. This time it was a call. The screen read, "Unknown number." He answered. "Jack Hensley." A man's voice, deep and familiar, came through. "Still standing tall like back in Kandahar. But Fairhill isn't a battlefield. We don't shoot here, we buy." Jack froze for a beat. The voice continued. "Here's the deal. Long-term shelter for her. A clean way out. But you disappear. Leave this town, cut ties, don't look back." Jack's eyes narrowed, jaw set tight. "You've got until tomorrow morning," the voice said. "After that, every door shuts." The next morning, Jack came back to the church with 2 cups of hot coffee, the strongest, cheapest brew from the gas station at the corner. Mabel was already awake, folding the thin blanket, her hands still trembling but her eyes clearer than the night before. They sat together on the steps for a while, saying little. Just the sound of birds in the pines and the faint smell of dew still clinging to the air. "Did you sleep?" Jack asked. Mabel nodded faintly. "Slept, but dreamed of my house. No door left. I was outside, calling and calling." Jack didn't answer. He looked out at Fairhill's rooftops catching the morning sun, the town pretending it had no part in any of this. Then a grey sedan pulled up at the bottom of the slope, stopping less than 30 yards from the church gate. A man got out, long brown coat, dark tie, polished shoes, an envelope in hand. Jack knew him on sight. Lawrence Keegan, the longtime attorney for the Harlan Group. His name floated through half the shady property deals in Fairhill, always standing between Harlan and the dirt. "What do you want?" Jack asked, blocking the path before Keegan reached the churchyard. I came to speak with Mrs. Kane. Mr. Harlan wants to help. Help? He's willing to settle this quietly. A modest financial package, provided she signs a waiver to drop any potential claims and cut all legal ties to her former property. She hasn't filed a claim. Not yet. But you're digging. And that hurts the company's image. Jack gave a short, dry laugh. Don't dress it up like charity. This is hush money. Keegan adjusted his glasses. Call it what you want. It's the cleanest way out. You and her would get 6 months' rent covered, $3,000 to start. After that, you could leave Fairhill if you choose. Jack said nothing. He turned and saw Mabel. She'd been standing closer than he realized, eyes fixed on the envelope in Keegan's hand. You don't need to sign anything, Jack told her. Let me see, she said, reaching out. Jack hesitated but didn't stop her. Keegan handed it over. She read each line slowly, as if decoding words that had no human weight. $3,000, she murmured. And 6 months in a rental. Inspri. Enough to live, Keegan said. No court, no headlines, no noise. Mabel folded the paper and handed it back. I used to teach language at the grade school, did you know? I taught kids to write sentences with kindness, and I can't imagine writing my name on a line that says the home I loved wasn't worth keeping. Keegan's mouth tightened. So you're refusing? Jack stepped in. She's not refusing. I am. And if you come back here again, I won't be polite. 1. Keegan exhaled, turned for his car. We opened a door. If you shut it, don't complain when all that's left are walls. The sedan pulled away, leaving a haze of dust. Jack watched it go, then turned to Mabel. They're not stopping. She nodded. And neither am I. Right then, Jack's phone buzzed. A new message. No name, no words. Just a photo. The church door, sprayed in fresh red paint, a circle with an X slashed through the middle. Jack stood staring at the red paint, smeared across the church door, a crude circle with an X slashed through it, like someone marking a spot for erasure. The paint was still wet, fumes sharp in the air. He didn't need an investigator to tell him this wasn't kids fooling around. It was a warning. He turned toward Father Liam, who had just stepped out with a mop in hand, his face tight. I'm sorry, Jack said. They left a message. They. Not the first time the church has been threatened, Father Liam replied, but the first time it's been aimed at people. Jack narrowed his eyes, mind circling back to yesterday. Lawrence Keegan thought tossing out a lifeline would make Mabel grab hold, never realizing someone who'd already lost everything had nothing left to bargain with. He headed to the small back room where Mabel was folding her cloth bag. She showed no fear. If anything, the calm in her eyes made Jack feel the weight of guilt. You don't have to leave here, he told her. I'll sort this out myself. But you need to know the deal yesterday was a trick, a trap. I figured, she said softly, nodding once. Only, sometimes I wish I were more foolish. Being foolish might hurt less. Jack sat, pulling out the printed copy of the legal document Keegan had brought. He tapped near the end. If you'd signed this, you wouldn't just drop any claims. You'd also agree to never discuss the matter with media, authorities, or investigators at any time in the future. A muzzle, Mabel whispered. Exactly. And the money wouldn't last 6 months. After that, no house, no records, no voice. She stayed quiet, hands folded on her lap. You're not alone, Jack said, and I don't back down. In the hall, Father Liam walked past, phone in hand. Jack, call for you. Name's Daniel Cross. Says he's an old friend. Ip. Jack shot up, took the phone, pressed it to his ear. Daniel, listen, I don't have long. The voice came fast. You've stirred the hornet's nest. Harlan isn't just flipping property. He's laundering money through real estate and fake housing funds. I've got files, but you'll need to get to someone. Who? Eleanor Price. She used to be an assistant accountant inside Harlan Group. Now she's under another name, laying low. I'll send you her address. But watch yourself, they know we're tracking. Jack glanced out the window. The sunset burned deep red over the church roof, the sky bleeding into the town. And right then, on the road below the hill, that black SUV slid into view again. Headlights off, engine quiet, parked still as a predator waiting in the dark. That night, wind whipped hard through the pines behind Street Jude's. Jack didn't sleep. He sat against the wall, legs stretched, backpack pressed close to his side like back in the barracks. Mabel dozed in and out on a padded chair by the window, thin blanket wrapped around her shoulders, her face lost in shadow, twitching every so often like even her dreams wouldn't leave her alone. Jack knew how to stay awake in the dark. In Fallujah, in Kabul, it was always the quietest hours when men went missing, And tonight, something in the air kept his spine cold. Near 1 in the morning, the crack of glass shattered the silence, sharp as a rifle shot. The room jolted. Mabel gasped awake. Jack sprang for the door, hand closing around a wooden staff near the coat stand. A side window had blown open, shards spraying across the floor. In the shadows outside, 2 hooded figures bolted for the tree line. One turned back, hurled another rock, smashing into the statue of Street John, knocking a chunk of porcelain clean off. Jack gave chase but never caught them. The wind lashed his face, mocking him. When he returned, Mabel was on the floor, trembling. Blood streaked down her arm where a shard had cut her when she stumbled back. Father Liam rushed in, robe half-fastened, eyes wide. "Good Lord, what is happening?" "They're done sending messages," Jack said, jaw tight. "Now they're acting." They wrapped Mabel's wound with a strip of bandage, makeshift at best. She didn't cry out, just asked quiet, "Will they come back?" "Yes," Jack said flat. "But next time, I'll be waiting." He stepped outside. The churchyard was littered with stones, bricks, glass. Across the stone wall by the main gate, black spray paint scrawled a crude line. "Get out, washed up soldier." Father Liam read it, lifted his head toward Jack. "Son, we've got no guards, no cameras. If this keeps on, I fear for her, and for this place." "Let them come after me," Jack muttered. "I'm used to it. This is God's house, not a forward post," Liam said firmly. "And that woman, she doesn't belong in the trenches." Jack nodded. He knew, too well. But he couldn't walk away, not when she was being crushed by a system both cruel and cowardly. At dawn, he left the church alone. Said nothing to Mabel, nothing to Liam. In his pocket were printouts of Harlan's property deals, and the address Daniel had sent, the one leading to Eleanor Price, the loose thread that could unravel it all. But as soon as he stepped past the church's boundary, a patrol car screeched to the curb, lights flashing red and blue. An officer climbed out, paper held high. "Jack Hensley, you're being summoned for immediate questioning over last night's disturbance at a religious site." Scenting. Around 3 in the morning, Jack jerked awake to the smell of smoke creeping under the door. At first he thought it was just heat from the old furnace, but within seconds glass cracked and wood split from the left-hand hallway. He shot to his feet. A dull orange glow bled through the crack, thick black smoke rolling with it. Gasoline mixed with ash burned his eyes the instant he opened them wider. He didn't need to check this was arson. "God damn it," Jack hissed, sprinting for Mabel's room. She was still asleep, face sunk into the thin blanket, unaware that the wooden door outside was already licking up flames. "Mabel, up!" Jack shook her hard, his voice cutting through the choking haze. Her eyes fluttered open, coughs racking her chest. "What? Smoke?" "No questions. Grab onto me. We're leaving. Now." He hauled her up, wrapping the blanket around her as a shield. Wind funneled through the hall, driving the fire harder, chewing up the walls near the exit. The front door was barred from outside. Jack shoved it, but the iron handle scorched his palm, skin searing. He pulled back, eyes scanning. "Side hall," he muttered. "Kitchen door." They turned, the blaze chasing their heels. Mabel stumbled with every step, lungs fighting. Jack nearly carried her outright, his shoulder raw as debris rained down from the ceiling. At the kitchen door he kicked hard. Fire had already bitten into the bottom edge. Once, twice, on the third hit it flew open. They burst into the back lot, smoke slapping their faces like fists. Jack didn't slow. He swung her onto his back, barreling across wet grass, vaulting a wooden fence. His back stung, collar singed, but he kept moving. At last they cleared the church gate. Jack set her down on bare earth, moonlight spilling over the blood streaking his arm. Mabel gasped, eyes wet. You're burned." "I'm fine," Jack rasped through smoke-scorched lungs. "You're alive." Sirens wailed in the distance fire crews, late as always. Maybe a neighbor called, maybe Father Liam. Either way, too late. Behind them, the church roof went under, tiles crashing down like drums of a funeral march. Father Liam staggered up from the front, hair wild, clutching a useless extinguisher, eyes wet. He dropped to one knee beside Jack, gripping his shoulder. "You all right, son?" "I'll live. She's still breathing, that's what matters." Liam looked at the smoking ruin. "This isn't a warning anymore." Jack nodded once. "I know." His gaze shifted toward the dark road, sloping down into town. Then his phone buzzed. A new message, a video clip, shot from afar, showing him carrying Mabel out of the fire. Underneath, a single line of text. "Next time, there won't be a back door." Morning light did nothing to clear the smell of smoke that clung to Street Jude's. Local police stretched yellow tape around the back wing, the part that had once sheltered Mabel. Charred boards lay scattered across the ground, mixed with ash and shattered glass. Mabel sat on a stone bench in the front yard, her bandaged hands folded in her lap. The burns weren't deep, but her skin was too thin to hold up long against fire. Jack stood beside her, his own arm wrapped in white gauze, his shirt ripped across the shoulder. They didn't speak, they just stared at the church like people staring at a faith stripped bare. Inside, Father Liam murmured prayers beneath the main arch. After firefighters confirmed no lives were lost and the building wasn't in danger of collapse, he'd said only one line: "If it still stands, its doors stay open." But the townspeople thought otherwise. An old schoolteacher who used to come every Wednesday to teach catechism stopped showing up. The janitor refused his next shift. The bakery that donated Easter bread sent an email: temporary suspension of support due to safety concerns. It was a small town. News ran quick. Everyone knew the fire was tied somehow to that old soldier and the homeless woman kicked out of the park. It wasn't just whispers anymore. People had started to steer clear. "You've dragged the church into trouble," Jack said quietly to Father Liam. "No," Liam shook his head. "It's the silence of this town that dragged trouble here. But you must understand they're afraid. Afraid of being named. Afraid of being pulled into what they can't control. I'm afraid too, but I won't let myself run." That afternoon, Jack took Mabel to the clinic for burn follow-up. The nurse glanced at them through the new smoke-proof glass, hesitated, then buzzed the door open. "You should know," she whispered while rewrapping Mabel's arm. "We've been warned from above. Limit aid to individuals without verified legal status." Everyone here knows who that means. Jack didn't answer. That evening, he patched the broken backroom window with cardboard and duct tape. Mabel folded blankets, packed the room neat as if ready to leave. "You know you can't stay here long," Jack told her. "This road's only going to get steeper. You could walk away." "No, not after all this." He pulled out his phone, replaying the video from the night of the fire. The sender was hidden, but the GPS tag put it near the back of Town Hall, an inside man, or one of Harlan's. Then the phone rang. Daniel Cross. Jack answered. "Eleanor Price just left her safe house," Daniel said. "She'll meet you, but on one condition." "What is it?" "She wants to meet, not you. She asked for Mabel Kane herself." By morning, Jack stood in the center of Fair Hills Square, the same spot where they once built a stage for the Spring Festival, the same place Harlan had boasted about his vision of sustainable urban growth. Jack had no microphone, no wooden podium, just a crumpled sheet of paper in his hand and a voice raw from sleepless nights. "Jack Hensley, Sergeant, United States Marine Corps. Active duty from 2004 to 2017. 6 deployments, 3 wounds, 1 return where only 5 of us made it out." No. People slowed. A kid lifted his phone to record. An older woman in a wheelchair froze halfway across the street. "I'm not saying this for thanks. I'm saying it because if any of you remember I once fought for this country, then know this today: I'm fighting for someone named Mabel Kane." The whispering spread. Jack held up copies of the foreclosure file, the spray-painted threat on the church door, the video of the fire. She lost her house over less than $2,000 in taxes. She's been denied shelter for not having an ID. She's been threatened, burned out, treated like a burden to be erased. And if you think that's acceptable, then maybe I fought for the wrong place. Some in the crowd lowered their eyes. Others kept recording. "I'm not the only one. Harlan's got money, land, the council in his pocket. But I've got memory, and I've got friends, people who lived, and some who died, believing in justice." Jack paused, took a breath. He raised a worn photo, 4 Marines outside a dusty tent in Helmand, arms slung across shoulders. 3 of them are gone. The one left is me. And I'm asking anyone who ever worked for Harlan, anyone who lost their land, anyone who saw wrong and stayed quiet, step forward, testify. Not for me, but for what's right. Behind him, Mabel's eyes glistened. Father Liam gave a nod from the crowd's edge. That afternoon, Jack started making calls. He reached out to Casey Brower, a fellow vet turned reporter for the next county paper. He messaged Luis Hernandez, once a Fair Hill cop, pushed out after Harlan leaned on him for refusing to ignore a land grab. Within hours, Casey's blog carried the headline, "The Soldier and the Forgotten Woman. What's Happening in Fair Hill?" Half an hour later, it was shared 200 times. An hour after that, an anonymous email hit Jack's inbox. "I used to handle Harlan's accounts. I have ledgers. But I need assurance Mrs. Kane won't be cut out." That night, Mabel sat at a wooden table in the church's back room, carefully stacking copies of documents, her hands steadier than before. Jack watched her, voice low. Tomorrow we meet Eleanor. Mabel looked up. And if she's afraid, then I'll tell her about Fallujah, where I watched too many die because no one spoke until it was too late. Meanwhile, high above in the Harlan Group office, Victor Harlan set down his glass of whiskey, eyes fixed on a monitor replaying Jack's speech in the square. He pressed a button on the desk phone. Phase 1 failed. Activate Plan B, tonight. The county attorney's office opened at 8 sharp. Jack was already there by 7:40, arms tight around a stack of files he and Mabel had scraped together over the past week, foreclosure papers, redrawn zoning maps, shady purchase records from the Harlan Group, and most important of all, an audio file from Eleanor Price, in which a mid-level executive admitted to expedited handling of personal property for strategic investment purposes. When Mabel sat beside him, her back a little bent, hands still wrapped in bandages, but her eyes sharper than he'd ever seen. She wasn't wearing her worn-out clothes. Instead, she'd put on a dark wool coat, buttoned clean up to her collar. "If we're still scared today," she whispered, "then we'll never stand anywhere again." Jack only nodded. No words. He was counting every step, every line he'd need to say once they went in. The meeting with the assistant district attorney lasted under 20 minutes. When Eleanor Price walked in to confirm the evidence and state her willingness to testify, the prosecutor's aide couldn't hide the tension on his face. That afternoon, the official filing went into Fairhill County Court. Plaintiff: Mabel Kane, longtime town resident, unlawful property seizure victim, physical and emotional harm. Defendants: Harlan Group Development, Victor Harlan, Chief Executive. By late afternoon, the local paper ran its first headline: Soldier brings public suit against Fairhill land mogul. By evening, the regional TV station aired footage of Jack leading Mabel through the courthouse doors. And just like that, Fairhill started to stir. The ones who'd kept quiet began to murmur. The ones who'd turned away began to ask questions. But it meant Jack and Mabel weren't in the grey anymore. They'd stepped into full daylight. And daylight burned both friend and foe. Harlan moved quick, like a seasoned politician. He staged his own press conference the very next morning, denying every charge, calling Mabel's case an unfortunate misunderstanding manipulated by a psychologically unstable veteran. When asked about the recording, Harlan smirked. "That audio has never been verified, and I trust the legal system." But then the unexpected happened. Luis Hernandez, the former police officer, released an internal report never made public, showing clear signs of falsified procedures in multiple land seizures, including Mabel's file. At the same time, a handwritten letter arrived at the courthouse, signed by 3 families who'd lost land to Harlan. They volunteered as witnesses if called. That night, Jack and Mabel sat on the church steps, patched back after the fire. They didn't speak. They just watched the town's lights, once cold, now glowing like a weary sigh. "Tomorrow's the real beginning," Mabel said. "And today, we open the door," Jack answered. Just then, Father Liam stepped out, holding an envelope. This was left at the door. Jack tore it open. Inside was a photo of Mabel as a young woman, standing in front of her old Maple Lane home. On the back, scrawled in rough handwriting, "We once took it from you. Now it's your turn to take it back." 3 days after the lawsuit was filed, Fairhill sank into another storm this time. Not about property deeds or zoning, but aimed squarely at one woman's mind: Mabel Kane. That morning a tabloid piece popped up. The truth about the woman behind the controversial lawsuit. A mental health record from the 90 seconds. No byline, no real sources, but it leaned heavy on words like unstable, psych evaluation, and involuntary treatment. By midday, an anonymous account on a local forum dumped old photos of Mabel looking dazed in a park, images clearly lifted from surveillance cameras, the kind only police or someone with access could pull. Jack's face darkened as he held the paper. He dropped it on the wooden table out back of the church, where Mabel sat reading in the soft fall Sunday. "You don't need to say it," she murmured, eyes still on the page. "I know. I can countersue," Jack said. "No need." She looked up, steady. "They only pull this when they know we're winning." Her words held firm, but Jack's chest still felt like stone. He dialed Daniel Cross. "Can you verify?" Jack asked. "They're saying she was committed." End. Silence on the line. Then Daniel, "There is a record, but it was voluntary. 1992. After her husband died and her daughter left, she checked into a clinic for a month. No diagnosis, no disorder, just a woman trying to survive grief. And now they twist it to smear her. This is Fairhill, Jack. They've wiped out whole families for missing 6 months of taxes. How do you think Harlan keeps power? Jack hung up, jaw set. He marched to the square, straight into the tiny newsroom where Casey Brower typed at her desk. He slapped the file down. You've already written part of it. Now finish. Write about 92. About a widow who still taught kids for 30 years. Write that she checked herself in, so she wouldn't harm herself, and write that the same woman had the backbone to refuse signing away her dignity. Casey held his stare, then nodded. She understood. That evening the story went live. The real record of Mabel Kane, the woman who wouldn't give up. Within hours, it was shared hundreds of times. Comments shifted. She's stronger than all of us. Remember when Mrs. Kane taught my 5th grade class? I once slept in the park. Now I get it. Not everyone bought it, but at least the story wasn't one-sided anymore. Late that night, Jack returned to the church. A letter was tucked under the door. No name. Just one handwritten line. Enough, Jack. On trial day, we'll do it our way. That afternoon, Ruth got the call from the Maplewood County Courthouse. The clerk's voice was flat, like he was reading a weather report. Due to missing original paperwork from 1988, your petition is temporarily suspended. You'll need to submit a notarized copy of the original land transfer. Her hand shook. That paper, she remembered the corner chewed by mice back in the 90s. She'd once handed it to an official when she applied to fix the roof, and she'd never seen it again. And now, that torn scrap had become the wall she couldn't climb. She set the phone down, her back bending further, her cloudy eyes covered in a new layer of grey despair. That night, she sat alone on the wooden porch chair. No wind, just the smell of rotting timber and the tick of a clock inside. These past weeks she had tried so hard walking between offices, asking her grandchildren to search old boxes, chasing down neighbor signatures. But the more she moved, the tighter the doors shut. Each time she walked out of a government building, she felt years older. Maybe I was wrong, she muttered. Maybe this house isn't worth it anymore. The light inside dimmed, reflecting her mood. No reply letters from the veterans group, no phone calls from the lawyer. Everything seemed to shrink away. Close to midnight, she pulled out the wooden box that held her husband's keepsakes. A handwritten letter from 1979, a folded medical slip, an old black and white photo of the family standing in front of this very house, back when it was whole. Her fingers trembled as she sifted through each piece. Then she saw it, something she thought was gone forever, a faded quarterfold copy of the land transfer, the inked red seal blurred in the corner. He kept it here. All these years, she whispered. Tears ran down, silent. In the middle of the wreckage, something small had survived, and that was enough to make her straighten in her chair. The next morning, Ruth carried the document to Julia Park. The young lawyer's eyes widened at the faint red seal. This is enough for the court to reconsider, if we file it with a statement about how it was kept, Julia said. Ruth nodded slowly, her chest still heavy, but no longer numb. For the first time in weeks, she felt she wasn't just a ghost shuffling through a cold system. By the end of the day, when Ruth left Julia's office, a light rain had started. She opened her old umbrella, muttering something to herself. Her steps were still slow, but they no longer dragged. She would keep going, not for land, not for bricks, but because her own existence couldn't be erased that easily. 2 blocks away, a black pickup sat idling. The man behind the wheel scribbled in a notebook, then lifted his phone. The document's been found. Move to the next step. No one called on him. No one expected it. But he rose anyway, as if his whole life had been waiting for this one moment. In the stale hum of the air conditioner, with papers shuffling faintly in the background, Jack Mercer pressed both hands on the bench in front of him, gave a small nod to the judge, then turned to the room. Most of them had never stepped onto a battlefield, never felt a round split the air by their ear, never smelled blood mixing with dirt after an ambush. He didn't need a microphone. His voice wasn't loud, but every word landed like a nail into wood. I've seen men hold each other, trying to keep one another alive for just a few more minutes, when there wasn't any skin left to cover the bone. I've seen a child caught between 2 firing lines, screaming for his father, while both sides only cared about who could kill faster. I've stepped over bodies, through villages left with nothing but smoke and stone. And I thought, when I came home, it would ease up. The chamber went still. You could hear the clerk's pen tapping lightly against a pad. Jack swallowed hard. But it didn't. Not at all. I've seen a piece of paper, a forged signature, carry more power than a bomb. I've seen silence from government, from neighbors, from the same folks who shook my hand when I wore the uniform. That silence cuts sharper than any bayonet I ever saw. He turned toward Victor Harlan, who sat cross-legged, face unreadable. "You called that boy an asset, a child, my own blood. Do you know what kept me from letting go when I was lying in a tent, bleeding out? The image of my son, the promise I'd come back. Not for medals, not for parades. Just to hear him call me dad again." "You quit." His voice shook, but he pressed on. "And now, standing here, I'm not asking for pity. I'm demanding justice. Not for me, I made peace with death years ago. For that boy, and for every other child left stranded in a world that won't even look down to see them." No one moved, no applause, but the air shifted heavier, slower. A few heads bowed. A court officer wiped his glasses. The judge drew a long breath and said, "We'll recess. The court will deliberate." Jack didn't return to his seat. He walked straight for the door, slow, as if setting down a weight he'd carried 30 years. Out in the tiled hallway, his phone buzzed. A message from Nora. Just 2 words. "They're here." It started to break beyond Fairhill's borders when a young reporter from the local station, Ben Ortega, drove out to the disputed land with a camera. He was the first to point a lens at Ruth's front steps, capturing her silver hair, her thin hands clutching old property papers framed by a torn-down fence, and the growl of an excavator in the distance. What had been buried inside court files, in whispered promises from attorneys, in the flat stares of clerks, suddenly stood visible, raw, and undeniable. The story aired Friday night, right when folks flipped on the TV for supper. By morning, the clip of Ruth saying, "All I ask is to die on the floor. I want scrubbed every morning," spread across community groups from Ashford clear to Philadelphia. Within 24 hours, 10,000 comments, hundreds of calls to the prosecutor's office, and one urgent email landed on a federal judge's desk with the subject line, "Immediate review needed on Hollow Creek Road seizure." The whole town held its breath when an emergency hearing was set for the following Monday. The real estate company fronted by Vanessa Price buckled, withdrawing its enforcement demand and offering a respectful settlement, not out of goodwill, but fear of the outrage boiling over. Julia Park, Ethan's lawyer, didn't flinch. "We don't settle on injustice. We demand a retrial." The court agreed, this time with media watching and advocates for the elderly sitting in the gallery. Over the next week, everything that had been shoved to the bottom came to light: false valuations, shady inheritance clauses, conflicts of interest in board decisions. Ruth, in plain clothes, holding her worn notebook filled with nearly 4 decades of care notes for the property, sat steady at Julia's side. Ethan sat just behind, fingers laced, his eyes fixed on the splintered wooden gate from Bridal Oak Manor, brought in as evidence the physical proof of slow, deliberate ruin. The ruling came: the company must pay damages equal to the land's use value over 30 years, and Ruth would be granted lifetime residency in the East Wing Room. What they tried to spin as asset optimization was declared an unethical land grab exploiting legal loopholes. Vanessa didn't show the day of judgment. Grant Lowell signed the agreement in silence, cameras flashing, his eyes glued to the desk. Outside, Ethan waited with Ruth on the courthouse steps. She said only, "Thank you for not leaving me like they did." Ethan nodded. Nothing more needed. That afternoon, trucks rolled in to rebuild the old fence. But what stopped Ethan cold was the sheet of paper tucked under the windshield of his pickup. An old map, marked Hollow Creek, Second Sight, scrawled faintly beneath. Maya once said there's something there. No one's touched. Jack no longer lived in the shadow of what he'd lost. Now he lived in a dim but steady light, the kind you build with bare hands, with faith, with small acts stacked one on top of another. After the trial, after the turnbacks and the late handshakes, he didn't go back to his old house. Instead, he walked to the end of Havenwood Street, to a converted warehouse that had once sat empty. Now it held 3 bedrooms, a small kitchen, and a porch of scrap lumber. That was the new Veterans Center. Ruth Old Mary, the first resident, moved in there. She had spent 3 winters under a pier. The day Jack helped her set a stool by the window, she said, "For the first time in 10 years, I'll hear birds from my bed." Most townsfolk didn't understand the whole story. They just saw the old Marine walking back and forth each day, quiet, no complaints. But little by little they noticed. The gate welded shut again, the walls painted soft, 2 extra meals served when new faces came. No banners, no speeches. Just a wooden sign at the porch: "We leave no one behind." The fund Jack started didn't carry his name. It carried his son's Benny like a whispered promise to himself: there's still something worth living for. Colt, the shadow that had haunted his dreams, was serving time. Not long enough to call justice, but at least the truth was on paper. Jack didn't preach about it. He let his actions speak. Mary told a neighbor that Jack never shed a tear when he spoke of Benny. But one night, when he thought no one saw, he sat alone on the porch, eyes lifted, clutching the old chain tight. He didn't cry out. He just stayed still. A group of local kids, ones who'd once been caught vandalizing, started showing up on weekends to sweep floors and fix chairs. They didn't call him a hero. They just called him the old guy. But every time they left, they turned to look back. Something in him demanded respect, not because of muscle, but because he held on to dignity without a sound. One early morning, a thin envelope was left on the doorstep. No name, no return address. Just one line in shaky handwriting. I saw it happen, but I stayed silent. This is part of my repayment. Inside was a check for $20,000. Jack didn't track down who sent it. He just started another small fund, this time for children pulled from their parents in custody disputes. Every step he took now had purpose. Not to fight the past, but to balance some of the weight it left behind. He knew he couldn't win every battle, but at least justice had a seat, small, fragile, but real, built out of the quiet decency he laid down each day. That night, while clearing plates from the porch table, he noticed a silver pickup idling across the street. The door never opened. The lights stayed off. Someone sat inside, watching, for a long time. This story reminds us that justice doesn't always arrive from the courthouse. Sometimes it comes from the quiet but unyielding acts of those who refuse to turn away. By the time we reach our mid-40s and beyond, after we've witnessed enough wins and losses, we understand the right thing is rarely the easy thing, but it still needs to be done. A roof, a hot meal, a single word of defense, those can mean the world to someone standing at the edge. The soldier in this story isn't a hero for his strength, but for his compassion when it mattered most. And for many of us, that's what endures after everything else fades. If you've ever waited for a loved one to come back from war, write the word "wait" in the comments and subscribe to Soldiers Coming Home so we can keep those memories alive together.